Greetings, pairs, orphans, and retrogrades. Happy Friday it is. I bid to you a happy, holy weekend. Today, on Rules for Retrogrades, I'll be talking to Melissa Presser, who is a convert to the Roman Catholic faith from Judaism. She entered the faith in 2016, and I'm honored to have her today. We're going to be talking about all things Catholic from Jew. And that's a big topic now. It's been a kind of evangelical week. Everyone's still talking about Bishop Barron's tremendous interview with Shia LaBeouf yesterday. And I have some questions from Melissa that'll touch on all things evangelical. So Melissa, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to the show, and thanks for being with me today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So you are a convert from Judaism. You've been in the faith now for 6 years, and you came into the faith in, only the biggest crisis in Roman Catholic history from inside. It's an in-house crisis. What's it like to be in the faith in the midst of the worst pontificate ever? To be
Well, I don't really have any thoughts or feelings, I guess, with regard to the pontificate, because I didn't live through anything else. So I don't really think that it's fair from my personal perspective to kind of look at those things. Sometimes I'm sort of a sideliner. I really am at a loss because I don't have that very rich history. And sometimes I feel authorized to, jump into more Jewish conversations than I do Catholic ones. So unfortunately for me, all I hear about is the ranting and raving from my best friend about JP2. And I have such Catholic envy that I wasn't around during then. So she was a big fan. So I like to listen to her stories about JP2.
Oh man, well, just trust me. This is the worst, literally and figuratively. And I was born during the JP2 pontificate, and people are getting nostalgic and romantic about it. I have that romance, the way it never was while I was alive for guys like Pius 9, Pius 10, Pius 11, 12. So anyway, it's a crisis in the church that's unmatched. And what I admire most is, amid all of the noise, folks like you, Melissa, that have the presence of mind to realize, even during the worst conditions for the possibility of evangelization, when literally this Pope discourages it, he calls it proselytizing, that you have enough presence of mind to basically, between yourself and the Holy Spirit, with virtually no aid by the middleman. You know who the middleman is? The church. Missiologically, the church is supposed to bring you the gospel. I really admire that you and others have had the wherewithal and the presence of mind to come in during this most horrible crisis of the church.
Yeah, it was definitely somewhat confusing for me. I think what helped is that I call it a pit stop. I took a pit stop in the Protestant church. A lot of people don't know that on Catholic Twitter. I was in the Protestant church for about 2 to 3 years, knowing things were a little off, but, a lot of people want to down the Protestants, and I don't even have enough history on that to be able to join in on that conversation. I try to look at things in a positive light. I'm kind of a glass half full type of girl. So, what I took with me from evangelical, being an evangelical, was the ability to preach the gospel and the supernatural power that God gave me to understand the New Testament without ever having read it, sort of the St. Paul conversion, teaching Bible study, falling in love with the scripture and knowing the scripture. And just being myself, really. I'm an attorney and I'm a trial attorney. So, not being afraid really of anything, and also working in the criminal justice system for 20 years. So I don't really have much fear of anything. And I think that, sometimes I would say to God, well, why me? I was perfectly fine, as a Jewish person. But, why, I guess why not me is the better question. Without me knowing it, I was qualified because I'm not. So that's kind of a good way to put it.
I'm a glass is half full kind of girl too. And with regard to all my Protestant friends out there, I have many, believe it or not. People are always shocked to hear that because we're a little rough on them in this show. I mean, they're good. They're in the family of God, right? They've been baptized in the Trinitarian formula. They're just like, as Milo Yiannopoulos used to say, the buck-toothed relative at the family reunion. But God bless them. You know, a lot of them these days, even under the worst pontificate ever, are getting the faith and coming into the Roman Catholic faith, the one true faith. So yeah, God love them. And a lot of people make that pit stop, by the way, Melissa. It's a more common thing. And for a lot of folks that go from some other religion entirely to Roman Catholicism, they're like, yeah, I don't really want to talk about it, but I made this pit stop, and they didn't have all the right equipment. You know, they're trying to take the tires off the F1 racer by hand. They didn't have the power tools, and it wasn't really the fastest pit team, but they had spirit, they had enthusiasm, and I liked that. But after one pit stop, I quickly switched pit teams to Roman Catholic.
I mean, I like talk. To me, it's something important. I mean, when I did my first interview on EWTN, when I was on the journey home, many years ago, not many, but, in the beginning, it was something I talked about. I think that God uses all things, Romans 8:28, he uses all things for good. Those of us that are called according to his purpose. And he did. I mean, I can, spout out a list of things that were good for me, that I took with me as treasures, listen, I practically read myself into the Catholic faith. I mean, the other good thing they did was they were very anti-Catholic, and being somebody who's defended the oppressed and very involved in justice issues, I was like, well, if someone's going to call someone a name, then, I'm going to go investigate that. So I really thank the Protestant church for helping to make me Catholic.
Yeah. God is good, my friend. And you must have read yourself into the faith. I guess that's why I have admiration for folks like you. And this is sincere and heartfelt, because basically anyone that converts now, like I said before, does what you did. They read themselves into the faith. Like Chesterton said, to be Protestant is to be historically illiterate. You read a little bit about the history of the church and you're like, oh, well, I guess if I like Jesus, I have to be Catholic. We'll talk about, there's so much I want to talk to you about today, Melissa. Did you know that? We're going to get to all of it because these issues are in the air. Yesterday, I did a show about what it is to be a $3 bill. That is to say, a Catholic American, an American Catholic. And yet our ideas, the Catholic intellectual tradition, are at the forefront of America, even though it's this fallen white Anglo-Saxon Protestant post-republic. It's Catholic ideas have always led the way, the Catholic intellectual tradition, at least. And so from a former Jew who is a Catholic, who's become a Catholic, but an American lawyer, your perspective is badly needed. I want you to think about this. Think about, while I run through these quick ad copies, think, Melissa, about all of the folks coming into the church today like you, and think about not everybody is trained to read texts so scrupulously the way lawyers are. And think about the great mercy that it is that you know how to read text, and some of the people are. It's mysterious, though, how anyone else is coming into the faith besides great readers of copious tomes of Catholic stuff. And then we're going to get to all of that. Really quickly, though, I want to plug once, or perhaps for the penultimate time, the forthcoming Baltimore Catechism class on timothyjgordon.com. It's free to those who can't afford it. We have a suggested donation of $100. It's going to be an 8-week class beginning the first Tuesday of September, which is next. Is that next week? Yeah. Baltimore Catechism. Dig it. It's not a universal catechism. As Catholics, we only have 2, but it is in some ways the most important catechetical teaching document for Catholic Americans, which has been a big theme on this show. So go to timothyjgordon.com, go to Retrograde Academy, and you can sign up for free. We're going to expand the class list to 500. 300 sold out the first couple days, then we expanded to 400. We'll go to 500, and then we got to cap it there. It just gets too crazy. timothyjgordon.com, Retrograde Academy, go to Baltimore Catechism class, which is free to you if you don't have the cash for it. Retrogrades and parish orphans. More importantly still, if you live in a blue state, go to realestateforlife.org, get yourself to a red state. Someone at realestateforlife.org, good people, mostly Catholics, all anti-abortion, will help you get, like I did, from the bluest of the blue to the reddest of the red. I suggest the blood red swath of states here in the American Southeast, the noble South. This is the place to be, because what's coming is a storm in the next few years once they open up COVID 23 or 24. Realestateforlife.org. Get it done today. You're not going to have a ton of time after the midterm election. You're going to get back to their hijinks. And with that, so Melissa Presser, you are now Catholic. You were once Jewish. You want to tell us how this change happened? What was the change agency?
Well, the short version, of course, is that I was in the Protestant church. I came in, I would say I accepted Christ in 2013, on Mother's Day in 2013, and very, very involved in my church. And I just felt that something was missing. I felt, coming from a very liturgical background, I was where I attended was conservative temple. I know a lot of, Catholics don't understand the difference between, what is someone who's a Reformed Jew versus but just like in Christianity, there are different sects and different, parts of religiosity in Judaism. And so I would say I was like, I wasn't Orthodoxy, but, our services were completely in Hebrew and obviously very liturgical. I started missing some of that. Like, where are these traditions? Where's the liturgy? It seemed like more of a stage to me. And so the Holy Spirit started talking to me by telling me I needed to pray in a chapel setting. It was way too specific for me to have a thought like that, because I just don't have thoughts like that. So I started calling around, places around my work where I was working at the time, and nobody was open. I would call all kinds of denominations. Nobody was open. They're like, I was like, God's not closed, So, someone had suggested I go, to the Catholic Church, and I was like, I cannot go into the Catholic Church. Like, God made me a Christian. I am not, going to cross that line. And so I used to sit in the Catholic Church parking lot and, like, during my lunch hour and literally cry, just please don't make me go in, God. And, the short of it is that it was such a strong conviction. It was the only church that was open. This is pre-COVID, obviously, that was open during the day. And I had a friend at work who I was working with at the time, and he was Catholic, and he said, well, I'm going to take you into the chapel. And I felt safe with him, to go into the chapel. He was someone I trusted. And, he didn't say much to me. We sat there. It just so happened that the Blessed Sacrament was exposed. I had no idea what that was. He didn't really tell me much. He just wanted me to experience it without sort of that human touch to it and have that supernatural experience. And so that's sort of how it started that particular day. And then I came back, I kind of snuck out. In my mind, I was sneaking out, but, I went on my lunch break the next day into that same chapel, just sort of staring at this thing I didn't know was Christ. And I was just overcome, I'm like, whatever this is supernatural, because I can't really describe it. And wow. During that time, I was also parallel, reading St. Edith Stein. I was blogging at the time on a different blog, and an Anglican writer, she was a reader and a writer, was in my little circle. She had suggested that I was reading Edith Stein. So it was sort of these like parallel journeys. And when I left that chapel that second day, I saw this like flash of light, and I was leaving, and I heard the Lord say to me, it's time to come home. So I was like, I guess I'm finding a Catholic church. So that's the very short version of what happened.
That's beautiful. And again, you just, if all people cared about the truth half as much as you, then the Rome, and I include a lot of Catholic normies, then adoration would be swelled. We'd have people, all over, up and down the Latin Mass. This would be, Catholicism would be swelling and healthy, and in a genuine, not to use a Podesta term, springtide. We'd have a Catholic spring. If anyone had half the conviction that you do just to arrive at the final play. I admire converts so much. Maybe I don't talk about that enough on the show. I admire Protestant converts, Jewish converts, converts from miscellaneous religions, like Reverend Lovejoy says about Apu. It's a beautiful thing, because it evidences such a proper orientation, a proper attunement to the truth. So I without a hint of flattery, I just want to say I really admire that. Now, as you talk about in 2013, you realized Jesus is the God-man and the Messiah. How did you come to that? I want to talk some about, Jewish to Protestant, before, which obviously antedates Protestant to Catholic. How did you come to that set of realizations?
I think I was always a seeker of the truth, very similar to Edith Stein. It was like my life was one lifelong search for truth. I had a lot of questions in the Jewish religion that weren't answered. And I was somebody who was a very faithful Jew. I was bat mitzvahed and all of those things, to sort of, I guess, speed up the process in terms of telling the story, and not the Judaism portion of it, but the Protestant portion. I am a survivor of sexual abuse trauma. And so that was sort of in the background of some of my questions about truth and justice and all of these things. It's actually the thing that made me an attorney, which is a totally separate story, because my dream was to be a writer, a journalist. And so, I was sort of seeking the truth all this time. I think a significant thing that I went through was my grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, because my whole family's Jewish. She died in 2007, shortly after I got married, and she was the closest person in my life. It completely destroyed me. And so I recall, being at the cemetery and saying to God, I'm not mad at you, but like, how about you go your way and I'll go mine? It was amicable, our separation. And, it wasn't that, I've mused on that because I spoke on another podcast about it. Well, was I an atheist? Was I not an atheist? In some ways I've kind of mused on that and said, yeah, in some ways I guess I was an atheist, because I became self-reliant. Which sort of led me down a really rough road, because I had not dealt with the effects of trauma. Back then, and I'm going to be 45 years old. So back then, growing up in the 90s, we didn't talk, there was no Me Too movement. There was no such thing as sexual abuse or pedophilia or any of these things. And we just didn't talk about these things. So, it manifested later in my life in horrible ways. And so I was sort of just going down this very dark road and going through a really, really difficult time with my identity, with who I was, with who God was. I mean, it really broke me. And so I was in, a really bad place in my life. And, I reached out to a family friend and I asked her if she was going to church. And she said, yes, you have a divine appointment. And from there, that's how I ended up in the church that day. So that's the short version of it.
That's interesting. So you didn't really even specify, hey, what sect of Christianity are you? Are you going to church? I just need to be in the presence of God. And you Christianity counted for you at that point.
Everything counted for me. Nothing was off the table. I don't think there was any religion that I didn't at least take a cursory view of. I'm more of a contemplative, I guess, mystic sort of person. So for me, it wasn't, even though I consider myself, an intellectual, I don't consider myself an intellectual and maybe the way, I don't know, people think about it. I was more concerned about, I guess, the emotional side of things and the empath in me, which was inherent. And so I was sort of like, I've got to know that there's some spiritual things going on. And I just said to my husband, we were sitting there one night, before I reached out to her, and I said, well, who do you think is the best person on the face of the earth? Like, if you could be, anybody, who would you be like? And, we both said Karen. Karen is the best person that we know on the face of the earth. And the woman never once told me that she was a Christian, never once, nor did she ever proselytize me, anything like that. I was like, whatever she is, that's what I want to be, because she was fantastic to me. I had no idea that she was a 33, year recovering alcoholic and was saved and all these other things. Like, I just had no idea. I just knew that when I was around her, I felt loved, I felt loved. And that was something that I had not felt in a very long time.
This is an interesting question and a bit of a touchy one, which means we're going to delve fully into it here on Rules for Retrograde. You say, and I'm taking you at face value. Karen sounds like a super nice lady, with the name Karen, and that's not always associated with nice ladies these days. But she sounds lovely, especially if two people with independent variables each say nicest person I know. What do you think would have happened? I mean, there's a modern answer and there's a pre-modern answer for this question. I know how each one plays out. I'm trying to sound out where we are on this issue. What do you think would have happened if Karen would have lovingly evangelized you a little earlier, or if she'd done so more? This isn't a critique of Karen. She sounds lovely, but there seems to be a prejudice now. I'm not saying you have it. It definitely comes from our Pope, and it definitely comes from the feeling, the spirit of Vatican II. There's a prejudice against missiology, which at the one time, both you and I agreed earlier in this interview, Protestants are really strong at it. They're evangelical. And that's a good thing because it's all over the gospel, spread the good news. It's the whole purpose of the church, along with dispensing the sacraments. But at the other hand, we Catholics have, with the fullness of truth, have assumed a sort of opposite equipoise, which goes, there's that fake story about St. Francis of Assisi. It's not true. It's falsely attributed to him to have said, I spread the word of the Lord at all times. Use it, only if necessary, use words. That's just not true. You have to use words, because if Karen was able to convert you, or let's say you and a few others you might not know about, with her love, imagine what a deadly, 1-2 straight cross combination that would have been if she's the lovely person she is, plus she used words. Words are the best conveyors of meaning. What do you say?
So I got to challenge you a little bit on that, and let me tell you why. Judaism in and of itself is its own community with its own unspoken rules. And unless you are somebody who came from, I guess, a Jewish community, you wouldn't know that. It's sort of like, if I wasn't, Italian, or I wasn't whatever my ethnicity was, within those communities, there are just these rules that when you meet somebody else, you just kind of know. And Karen, the thing that Karen had going for her was that she had a parent that was Jewish. So she was raised in a household where she did understand Jewish customs. She was actually raised Catholic. I believe she was raised Catholic, and they had taken her to Catholic church because one of her parents were Catholic, but the other parent was Jewish. So she had that side too. I think Karen inherently knew the same thing I inherently knew, which is I would have been totally offended as a Jewish person had she brought that up to me in a, I guess, had brought up Jesus. I guess it would have really mattered in the way she brought it up, because I had had people talk to me about Jesus before, and really, I don't know if it's naivety or the way that I grew up in my community, but as a Jewish person, as a child, I thought that all Gentiles were Christians. This was literally what I thought, and this was my thought pattern. I didn't know it was an option. And so not only that, but even, being part of the temple, when I started to ask about it, I was like, well, some of my friends believe in this Jesus guy, well, who is he? And they're like, you're not even allowed to say his name. So, being a girl who was traumatized, on one, that was definitely something that was going, against me, but, being someone who's a rule follower and not wanting to go against my community and all of those things, I don't know. I think it would have depended on the way she said it. And that's why, these things are somewhat controversial, right? And that's why when people say, how do I, talk respectfully about the Catholic faith to a Jewish person? And I get these calls all the time. It is difficult. It is difficult because, it is a touchy subject. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense.
Of course, respect in the absolute sense, if we're not, I'll use the Thomistic metaphysical term, if we're not prescinding from respect and getting overly specified, always matters. But now we have all these rules of ecumenism that I think get smart men into real trouble. And I'm talking about men like Bishop Barron, who had this amazing conversation with Shia LaBeouf about his conversion yesterday. Everyone's still talking about it, but it's got him into trouble because he said stuff famously to homosexual and another Jew, Ben Shapiro, when questioned, hey, do I need to convert? Ben Shapiro asked him that, and he said, well, Jesus is the privileged path, implying that there are other paths, implying that what Jesus said when he said, I am the way, and there's no path to the Father but through me, that he was wrong. I mean, all of these implications are pretty linearly extrapolated from things he directly said. People always say context, but there's a context there. So I would say this, look, Catholicism, the one true faith, is the show and tell religion. Imagine now, this is the point I was making before. Imagine if, and I'm not just talking about your experience, but I do want your perspective. Imagine if, remember in show and tell in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, you brought your turtle, and let's say usually the teacher says show and tell. You brought your turtle and you have this amazing story. Your turtle was walking in some ooze, and it's actually teenage turtle and it can do ninja moves, right? All of that, and its name is Michelangelo or something, my favorite of the turtles. Imagine that, right? Like if all you, but he transforms back into a regular turtle by day when he's in front of a childhood classroom. Let's say that. This is how I think. Okay. So
yes.
Imagine all this, but you just brought him and you're only allowed to show language. Literally, man is the rational animal. For Thomas Aquinas, we belong to the genus animal, but our specific difference, the difference that separates the genus into the species man, is that we're rational. We have proper accidents, like we're risible, and we have language that go with that specific difference of being rational. The main mark of being rational is speech. So I'm not saying you're arguing for this, because you're not, but a wrong interpretation of what you said that's very popular in the Church of Nice, very popular with guys like Bishop Barron, is like the falsely attributed St. Francis thing. Show the world, but don't tell them. And I'm just saying speech is offensive. That's, like Jordan Peterson says, that's by nature what it does. The most important thoughts are the most offensive ones. But if we just showed our turtle to the class, we just showed our love to the class, that doesn't even point you specifically at anything. It's the show and really the tell that's 99% of your presentation. What say you?
I agree with that. I think that, when my editor asked me to open a Twitter account, I was like, oh no, like I'm not into any of that. I tell my story. I've told my story, both the vanilla version and the not so vanilla version many times, and that is what God has asked me to do, because that is evangelization, telling my story, telling the truth. And that's, who I am in terms of my charism, and having this sort of St. Paul conversion, and understanding that God chose me for some reason, don't know why, but chose me for this reason, to be able to speak to people about my personal conversion. When I got on Twitter, I wasn't really ready for the onslaught of speaking about my story, because really I had been very accepted. I don't say living in the shadows, but there's a big difference between speaking at parishes, and then speaking on the internet. And that was some of my concern, right? Because not only am I a convert, but my Israeli former atheist Jewish husband also converted. And then my kids, just like you guys, I have kids, and and I consider them cradle Catholics, because I converted when they were little, and so to me, it's not so much, it's really the verbiage you use, right? Like, I'm not on Twitter to convert anybody. I'm not God, I'm not there to convert anybody. I'm not there to proselytize anybody. I'm there to be obedient to what the Lord told me to do, which was to go out and tell people the good news about how the good news affected my life, about the fact that if it wasn't for Jesus, I wouldn't be sitting here having this interview with you, because I would have been dead. And I think that, I was speaking to a friend the other day about my trauma and my sufferings, which, I write about. That's my whole ministry, is on redemptive suffering in my writing. And so, he was like, I get it, because but for those sufferings, you would have no story. And that's such a conundrum, right? That is such a conundrum to be in. And my bigger charism, I really feel, even above and beyond what God has called me to do, has to do with, mental health, and telling people, yeah, there's an answer. Guess what? I just wrote an article about receiving the sacrament of anointing of the sick when I had suicidal ideation. If it wasn't for that, maybe I'd be dead then too. There's so many ways, that we can speak the truth. I mean, we're all such unique people. There's one truth, but I think it's some of the verbiage that's used that sometimes offends people. And even recently I offended a bunch of people by just asking a question. So, I think you just have to be true. You know the truth, what God's asked you to do, and you have to live it in the way that the Lord has asked you to live it. And that's what I do. And that's why it's tough. It's very tough.
No story, but for suffering, is the shadow of the cross. Have you ever suffered, since that's the theme, a conversation, even a short one, with someone that really evidently has had no suffering in their life? It's insufferable to suffer a conversation with someone who hasn't suffered. They're boring, right? And the whole purpose of Christianity is I think this is what you're saying. It is the one true faith. It's the one faith of all of the competing faiths that knows what to do with suffering. We unite ourselves to Jesus on the cross. The source and the summit of the faith is the sacrifice of the Mass. I mean, literally, we walk through Jesus's death again and receive him body, blood, soul, divinity. So that's why it's so boring. I think I was in my late 20s after we suffered tremendously for many years after my first daughter was born with a major health problem and tons and tons of brain surgeries and tons of time practically living in children's hospitals. I was in law school after my first daughter was born, and I spent almost no time in the library with everyone else. I spent much of my time in Rady Children's in San Diego, and just that was hard to suffer. But that's the heart of Christianity that I think, because you've got your antennae out, unlike a lot of folks, you picked up on. A second thing is I see that you joined Twitter in May of 2022, and like you said, giving a talk in front of a church is a vastly different world from being on the internet where people are dicks. Yeah. They're not nice on the internet, particularly Twitter. It brings out the worst. So I know you have this one story we have to talk about, this recent thing that's got you into trouble for just saying the truth. That's internet stuff. That's not in-person stuff. You're noticing the difference. Us influencers talk about the vast difference between someone that disagrees with you at a talk at a church, they'll bother to address you respectfully. On Twitter, it's open season on you.
Well, what's interesting about that is, so I joined Twitter in May, and I want to tell people who are listening, people have asked me, like, what did you do? And to gain followers. By the way, I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm doing on Twitter. I overnight gained like a couple thousand followers. I mean, it's only August, like you said, and I think there's like 4,000 plus people following me. And I was really taken aback. I was really, it scared the crap out of me, to be honest with you, because, I was just like, this is a lot, and I wasn't expecting, I had expected to, the whole reason I got on was because of my writing. I'm writing my memoir. God is fulfilling this dream I've had since I'm 4 of writing. And I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm just going to get my writing out. And all of a sudden, I wake up to like thousands of followers and people asking me, okay, be on my show and all these things. It was really overwhelming. I think what really surprised me, exactly what you said, was the fact that as an attorney, I am used to having this particular type of discourse where, you're arguing with somebody all day, in a courtroom, and then you're going to have a beer with them, an hour later.
Right.
So, that's my mentality, and also as an intellectual, I'm all, and I don't say that to be pompous. I'm just saying that, if you're going to have a conversation with me, typically what I find is, you're going to call me a name. If you don't want to have a conversation with me, you're just going to call me a name and kick me in the ass and leave, right? That's what you're going to do if you don't want to talk about it. Yeah. And so what God really said to me was, yeah, you're smart and you can talk about your career in the criminal justice system for 20 years, and that would be great. But I'm not going to have you do that. I'm going to have you be completely vulnerable about all the crap that you've been through. Whether it's been through your sexual abuse trauma, wanting to take your own life, that really dirty road that you traveled to even get to me. And let me tell you how uncomfortable, as a person who, practicing law 20 years, having a family, being, a respected member of my community, and going out there and just having all this stuff on the internet, and to me, it's like, okay, well, I love you more. That's the phrase I use, I love you more then, or I love you more. And that's what I think about, and recently, and I don't know if you want to get to it now, but, that's why I was really sort of taken aback when I asked a question that was an innocent question, because I'm a truth seeker, as you know. You've been interviewing me a little while, and I'm always asking questions. I don't, just take what you say on face value. I used to be a criminal defense attorney. So I'm going to cut you up on a cross-examination and say, well, maybe you're not who you say you are. That was my job. So before, and a police legal advisor, so also in an investigative role. And I was really shocked and surprised at the backlash that I got for simply asking a question. And I think that's what sort of gave me pause and said, wow, like, God gave me this platform. I didn't do anything to deserve it. I didn't do anything to ask for it. And whatever plan he has is coming together on this crazy platform.
What was that question you asked? Is this the Maximilian Kolbe thing?
Yeah, so I don't venture too much off on, I don't have really time to scroll or any of that stuff. And so, but I was like, oh, I wonder, what's going on. I was having 5 minutes to look and whatever. And I found a post on the feast day of St. Maximilian Kolbe by a journalist, an American journalist. And essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially it said, well, it did say St. Maximilian Kolbe is an anti-Semite. It was part of a longer thread that I don't, recall every word, so I don't want to misquote this journalist, but that was something she said. She said St. Maximilian Kolbe is an anti-Semite. Well, it happened that morning that St. Maximilian Kolbe interceded for me without me asking, okay, which is a totally separate story. And I had been singing his accolades because to me, the two saints of Auschwitz, Edith Stein, who converted me, and St. Maximilian Kolbe are two of the most important saints in my life. He had interceded for me on a huge issue. And I was like, what? So I quote tweeted this particular journalist, and she came on my page and was like, I'm sorry, Melissa, but it's true. She also has a Jewish background, which she has described on her page. So I'm not saying anything that's in private. Her mother was Jewish.
Right.
Yeah, she's a journalist. Her mother is Jewish. Her dad is Catholic. She was raised Catholic. And so I asked a question because the Holy Spirit prompted me to ask this question. I had no idea why I was asking this question. The question was, and again, I don't remember exactly, I'm not on my Twitter page right now, is do you consider anti-Semitism as evangelization? Meaning, do you consider that to be anti-Semitic, or are we talking about racial and ethnic bigotry and prejudice and in the way that we understand it, in the way the ADL defines it? Because certainly, and I released a chapter in my book that's actually, we actually took down the paywall to talk about, because I got my ass kicked as a Jewish person when I was living in California. And so I wrote a chapter about that. And so I'm like, I don't know but I didn't say any of that. All I said was, do you define anti-Semitic as evangelization? And oh my God, let me tell you something. I was not prepared for that response that I got back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's their word for Catholic a lot of times, particularly pre-conciliar Catholic. I think they just say, well, what's the Catholic teaching about, you mentioned Edith stuff. So both your saints, I'm a little jumbled now because there's a lot of information here. Both of your saints that you're especially patronized by, Edith Stein, Maximilian Kolbe, have something to do with this less than cheery relationship between Catholics and Jews in one way or another. And both of them, in a way, got you into trouble with the Jewish community, right? Because Edith Stein, maybe you could talk about this in a second. And Word on Fire, to their credit, I guess, did invite you to write your politically incorrect piece, to speak your piece about what Edith Stein said in her last will and testament. That got you in some trouble. Defending Maximilian Kolbe, that also got you in some trouble. It just shows, to bring up another Word on Fire issue, Jesus is not just the privileged path, he's the only path. So to really evangelize Jesus, maybe including Jews, but maybe particularly to Jews, is offensive. But it should be. I'm not saying it's bad and offensive. I mean, Edith Stein basically seems to be in concomitance with the preconciliar popular Catholic refrain about the Jew. It's a perfidious relation, at least according to us Catholics.
Well, Edith Stein was, like you said, extremely controversial. Her canonization was extremely controversial. I always say Edith Stein did not die because she was Catholic. Edith Stein was murdered in Auschwitz because she was Jewish. And while the Catholics canonized her as a saint, the Jews condemned her as a traitor. And they think that she's a total coward. So that wasn't lost on me in reading her story. Her story is tragic in so many ways and beautiful in so many ways, because she had such a particular mission. But it's complicated, right? It's complicated in the same way that, St. Maximilian Kolbe, I think it was 4 days after she was gassed in Auschwitz, died in Auschwitz 4 days later for taking the place of another prisoner who was at Auschwitz. He was starved to death in a starvation bunker. And then when he didn't die, when they couldn't kill him, then he was given a lethal injection and died on somebody else's behalf. So although they have, very, very similar, paths, one was Jewish and one was not, but, both, controversial issues that are coming up, and especially with Edith, because I remember initially when I converted, I had a gentleman who was very big in the Jewish community who reached out to me. I thought it was on a business issue. It wasn't. We had a conversation, and in that conversation, he said to me after we sort of switched topics, he was like, "I wish you would have read, sort of something else but Edith Stein. Like I wish you would have considered other things." And I'm like, "Well, I did consider other things. I grew up as a Jew. I was bat mitzvahed. I considered Judaism for 30 whatever years. But even bringing up her name is offensive." And so I feel sort of like boxed in, right? It's like, no matter what I do, it's sort of like Jesus. No matter what he did, it was controversial. With what he did with the Pharisees was controversial. And Jesus is controversial. A lot of people see him as, they want to see him as somebody who, was very docile and loving. And Jesus is very docile and loving, but what Jesus taught is very hard. It's very hard, and some of the things that he talked about are very hard. And so, this is a cross I carry. I'm very well aware of it. I think that because it was on Twitter, and it was because it was on the internet, it was amplified. I mean, that tweet made it all the way to I was telling you, to Facebook and all other places. And it was like, here's Melissa Presser, and she's, enemy number one, and she's, for cultural genocide. And by the way, the second half of that was, and by the way, you can't call yourself a Jew. You lost that right when you became a Catholic. And that's when I think I started to suffer, really, because being Jewish is part of my identity. Part of what I talk about with people is when I got pregnant, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. So, they test me for genetic diseases like Tay-Sachs. My blood is Jewish. By Jewish law, I have a Jewish mother. I check all the boxes. And, it's interesting to me in this culture that's so about identity, that those same people who are so about identity that I've been so kind to, because I understand that, are the same people that came after me to tell me, you have no right to have that identity. That was the moment that I realized this is truth. This is exactly what Edith Stein was talking about. And I have to tell you that broke me. I mean, you can talk to people that talk to me after that, but after struggling with my own identity for all those years, from trauma and from crossing over and from being in the Catholic Church, who, by the way, has been phenomenal to me about my identity. Getting that backlash again from people in this, misidentity culture, whatever you want to call it, I was like, wow, I'm the person that stood up for you and said, you know what, well, here we are, and I can't be that, including one woman who called herself an atheist Jew who told me that I wasn't allowed to be Jewish. I was like, well, isn't that interesting? So it was a tough couple of weeks for me, no doubt.
Well, let's back up half a minute. What about Maximilian Kolbe is controversial? These terms are ridiculous. And what about Edith Stein specifically is controversial to the Jewish community? Can you name those two things?
It's controversial that she was canonized as saint because they said that she took the easy route out by going into a convent and was sort of protected by the Catholic Church. And again, this is just a summary of what the argument would be. And then she's not a saint. She betrayed her people, essentially. And I
didn't
can't
she say, did you want to include what she said that you're writing about for Word on Fire in the last will and testament?
Yeah. So I published this article, which, by the way, I think you talked about it before. Sorry, I'm looking away. I'm just trying to pull up the article, but
I never am looking right. I'm pretending I'm looking at you. I'm looking at the camera. The computer's here. I can't even see it. So
yeah. So I when I crossed over from Protestant to Catholicism, because I lost all my writing jobs when I crossed over, one of the first pieces I pitched was to a very big publisher, and part of it was my story intertwined with Edith Stein's story, and for their publication. And they were very gracious about it until they got to the part where I was talking about Edith Stein's last will and testament. I can read the excerpt if you want me to.
Yeah, please, okay. Please do.
So it says, even now I accept the death that God has prepared for me in complete submission and with joy as being his most holy will for me. I ask the Lord to accept my life and my death, so that the Lord will be accepted by his people, and that his kingdom may come in glory, for the salvation of Germany and the peace of the world. I beg the Lord to take my life and my death, for all concerns of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary and the Holy Church, especially for the preservation of our holy order, in particular the Carmelite monasteries of Cologne and Echt, as atonement for the unbelief of the Jewish people, and that the Lord will be received by his own people, and his kingdom shall come in glory, for the salvation of Germany and the peace of the world, at last for my loved ones, living or dead, and for all God gave to me, that none of them shall go astray.
Sounds pretty based. So she asks as atonement for the unbelief of the Jewish people, and this is going to get you in trouble, right? I mean, this is Catholicism, right? This is
it's a lot, you know. I mean, I get it, you know, it's a lot, and that's why, you know, there's words that I just can't describe, that I'm like, whatever that feeling that she had, whatever that pain, whatever that suffering is, it doesn't even have a word, because you sort of have to be it to understand it, you know. And I get it. It's like, you know, this woman was gassed, you know, she was and then canonized for being this martyr, and they hate her, you know, they hate her. And, you know, but that's right. That's biblical too. So it's that juxtaposition of that suffering. And again, cyclically saying, but there's somewhere for that suffering to go in the wounds of Christ, including what I talk about in my writing, which is the buried wound of betrayal that we don't think about so often, which is the wound that I relate to the most.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, I'm not a huge fan of her other writings, but that is a true act of courage to have said that. And it sounds like the trappings of a legitimate martyrdom, which explains her sainthood. So now, how about Saint Maximilian Kolbe? Why would he be called an anti-Semite?
Well, actually, I've taken up that cause. I've decided that I would like to write a book about it. So I'm now gathering. I called the shrine in Illinois, and I'm actually on back order for his original writings. You know, it's been debunked before. I've spoken with some priests and a journalist and a couple of other people, but there are some writings of his that have been interpreted, well, I guess that other people have interpreted to be anti-Semitic. But the problem is that the context of them has been left out. So that's part of it, right? When you're studying history, when you're studying all of those things, you know, that's what I'm trying to get to is, you know, well, why? And then there was pointed to some writings with regard to he was anti-Jewish businesses and he wanted them to leave Poland, and some other things that I have not had the chance to review. And I think for me, rather than make a statement or a conclusion, I'm not going to do the same thing that she did, which is not look at everything, which is the truth, right? I'm going to look at the writings themselves, the primary sources, and also get, you know, additional items that have been included in that. So,
yeah, I want the parish orphans and retrogrades out there to hear me. This is like that part on the Starsky and Hutch remake when Starsky is like gets involved in a disco dance off at a discotheque, and Hutch is like, dude, what are you doing? And then he's like, no, I can beat this guy. And he's like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying this is so gay. Why are you? So I'm not saying like, oh, Edith Stein, Maximilian Kolbe are being called anti-Semitic and like exculpate them. Like, it doesn't matter. Like every Catholics get called anti-Semitic just for being Catholic from the press, which calls everything anti-Semitic. So I just want to make clear, I'm not afraid for either of those saints. I mean, they're saints in heaven. You know, who cares what you call them, sticks and stones, right? I wanted to know, as a matter of fact, not necessarily as a matter of law, what is the specific
it comes from his
qualm by the Jewish community?
Yes, it comes from some writings in his publication that she was referring to. And so that's why I want to see them, because there was another article written, I think he wrote like whatever it was, I don't have the number in front of me, but let's say 1,000 plus documents. And this particular professor that looked at it was saying out of all those documents, 30 of them even mentioned the Jewish people. And so my follow-up question as I'm doing this research was, well, what defines you as what defines somebody right after they pass? Like, are we defined by one thing? Are we defined by our entire life? the whole crux of Catholicism is that when we, repent, and come back to God, isn't that the crux of what we do, is continual, repentance? I don't know. These are really hard questions that I'm going to be looking at when I'm doing the research project and pitching the book about defending the saint. But, to me, when he's gonna reach out and ask me and intercede for me that morning and ask me to look at these things, then, I'm going to do right by him and look at these things, whatever those things are. But it just begs the question for shock value, just to kind of put that up there and say, well, he was an anti-Semite. Well, I don't know. What are people saying about me? I don't know. I mean, I'm a Jewish person who's, loves Israel and, has a Jewish family. I mean, these things are sort of mind-boggling,
Yeah, no one's safe. No one's safe. Anyone can be. It doesn't matter what your blood says. If you love Jesus, you're gonna get called an anti-Semite at one point or another. I'm curious. Are you, Melissa? Are you familiar with this book? I'm sure you are. It's well known. Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist. It's a good book by Brian Petrie.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. And Roy Schumann also wrote "Salvation is from the Jews," which I would highly recommend.
I have that on my bookshelf somewhere.
It's excellent. And Roy is for those of your viewers that don't know, Roy Schumann was a former Harvard professor who converted from Judaism to Catholicism.
Yeah. Is Roy a typical, whenever I saw his story, that I don't think of Roy as a typical Jewish name. Is that a Jewish name? I'm just curious.
I mean, I've heard the name Roy before. I mean, his last name certainly is Jewish.
I think of Roy as like a southern kind of redneck, old Roy. Isn't that a dog food or something? It's just a funny, doesn't sound, so I know you wanted to spend some time on this. I watched your video, Melissa, in regard to being canceled. I mean, you're being canceled left and right. This makes you a good fit for the show. By even the law enforcement community. And I mean, did you want to talk some about that, or even the connection between your sexual assault and your eventual conversion? I think those are two separate issues, but you sort of tied them together in your most recent Twitter video.
It's been a difficult year. I think the bottom line is that I'm a truth teller. When people hire me, they know I'm going to be a truth teller. In my writing, I'm going to be a truth teller. And so these situations have been difficult. I left my career. I was with this particular police department almost 11 years, and I left, and had a year in between my last job and this job. And so a lot of these things have sort of run together, in terms of telling the truth, using my voice, and, me sort of turning to God and going like, well, why me? Why do I have to keep getting canceled or, used in this way? And well, that's really not the easiest thing to do. I loved my job. It's been a difficult transition, but the other part of that too is that as a result of, that career transition, which I'm still working as an attorney, but, God has sort of brought me into this promised land of writing, which goes back to, when I was 3-4 years old, wanting to, pursue a career in writing. And so overnight, people were reading my writing and talking to me about my writing, which is, the greatest passion that I've had in my life. And so I don't know what God is going to do about all that, but everything seems to revolve around the fact of telling the truth, standing up for the oppressed, standing up for what's not right, and telling the truth at all costs, because the truth is divisive. And Jesus tells us that the truth is going to be divisive. You will be hated for my name. He said it's going to cause division in families, right? These sayings are hard. These sayings are difficult, but I think the difference is if you haven't lived it, people are like, oh, it's great, to be a Christian. Well, have you lived it? Have you been a Jewish person who's been, canceled or hated or, all of these other things, until you've lived it, or, at least the Lord has, called you to tell the truth. I think it's a difficult thing to do and talk about. Yeah.
Well, certainly. Well, so, I mean, we're glad to have you. We're glad to have you on this side of things. Jesus is the way, the one way to the Father, and as he says, and the Gospels are not the defanged anodyne set of I don't know, moral, therapeutic, deistic aphorisms that they're taken to be. It's just a fact, and that means that someone like you with the wherewithal to see, to be able to read the sign of the times and say, I need that Eucharist. Even the fact that you went into before the Blessed Sacrament in Eucharistic adoration and you felt a presence, I think that makes it self-evident that you've got good antennae. So we're glad to have you, Melissa. Is there any place you'd like to direct folks to your writings or anything else that you've got happening on out in the interweb? There, I'm pointing to the air.
So the real reason, I'm out there. So we have an amazing independent startup publication called Missio Dei. And so you can find all my writings on missiodeicatholic.org, and my book, which we are publishing chapter by chapter. It's called Walk the Land, which details my conversion story. The plan is to, for paid subscribers, they can read my book, but we also have free content on the page, and I write also our Sunday gospel reflection. The idea is to get readers interested in my story so that next year I can publish it in a book format, in a print version. But all of I write for many different places. You can go to melissapresser.com. That will give you my Twitter handle. If you want to, give me some backlash on Twitter and tell me who I am, that's cool too.
Yeah. Tell you what you're really about.
Right. Who am I? I'm not sure. Twitter voted. You can tell, my Twitter handle. You can find, my writing from Catholic Mom or Pathos or Missio Dei, but, Missio Dei is my writing home. And just a shout out quickly to my editor, Philip Haddon, and our other partner, Jonathan, who have just been amazing. And I have to say something about my editor, just because, when everybody else didn't want to take me on, because I was such a conundrum, Philip was like, I will take you on. Honestly, it could bring me to tears, but, and he totally believes in my work. And he lets me write, and he doesn't edit me, and I have to give him mad props for that. So I hope everybody will take a look at our other fabulous writers also at missiodeicatholic.org.
Yeah. No, that's really important what you just said. A good editor that'll stand by you, even though other publishers won't. It's not a common property among publishers. So I always shout out Sophia Institute Press as being run by really good people, the best Catholic publisher, and really not afraid, even though they're in the mainstream Catholic world, not afraid of non-mainstream positions. So I do have to thank Word on Fire, because they published that article and they've been wonderful to me. I speak the truth, how people are to me, and they reached out to me, and that article was sitting dormant, just so you know, for 6 years, sitting in my inbox in Google Docs. And they said, let's do it, let's publish it. And I got to give them credit for that, because, seeing that article published, I almost lost my mind, like, wow, people believe in my work because I have nothing to hide, like, this is the truth. This is what happened, so I just want to thank them very much. Melissa, I wasn't planning on saying this, but Word on Fire is like the least, if you ask me, the least likely to take on that article with the last will and testament of Edith Stein. I'm thinking of the Bishop Barron, Ben Shapiro incident that's now infamous. So I do sense a tremendous amount of will for the good at Word on Fire. And I know some of their employees are quite good. And I sense some good in Bishop Barron. I do. It's like Luke, with Vader. Like I say, in the latter part of episode 5, early part of episode 6, like I was reinvigorated, like a little flame that's dying out in me yesterday when I watched Bishop Barron interviewing Shia LaBeouf. He did a good job with that interview, but there's a lot of ambivalence. So for you, a Jewish convert to Catholicism, I would really encourage you. You could do your conversion itself could do such a tremendous amount of good if respectfully, in a posture of filial piety, you thank them at Word on Fire, but you push them like, hey, look, let me speak. Like, Jesus is the only way. Jesus isn't the privileged path. He's the only path. If he was the privileged path, one among many, I might not have converted. I mean, you and your story could really open up that whole enormous apostolate of Word on Fire. I really hope you become a main feature at Word on Fire. And I really would hope that what would be the main feature is, well, we're sort of rethinking what we said to Ben Shapiro about privileged path, only path. I think you could do so much good.
Well, Bishop Barron has been a real force in my life. I know that, there's things that have been said about him, and even the things that you said. And I can only say that in my conversion, he's been very instrumental. We don't have time to talk about it today, but, I think God does things for a reason. And all I can say is that even without some of the things that he's said in some of his videos, I don't know where I would be today as well. So, let's see how things all shake out. All glory to God, because it's God's path, right? And we don't know what the plan is, but I'm just grateful for all the people who have really taken me in the Catholic Church and loved me the way that I needed to be loved.
Most important thing in this entire interview, and it's a bit of a correction. You called yourself a Gen Xer, and I want to alleviate you of the burden of being a Gen. You're actually a cusper, Melissa. Did you know that there
don't
are
argue with me about that. 1977 is squarely within Gen Xer.
No, there's one cusp that has it at 76, and I'm trying to help you because you don't want to be a Gen Xer. Gen Xers are just boomers junior. You want to be millennial. I'm 81. And you should argue for that second interpretation of the cutoff year, because then you're squarely a cusper on the right side of things.
Yeah, well, you can go ahead and quiz me on 80 songs, and then we'll have like a face off. So
then you're starting to seem Gen Xer again. You're slipping back into Gen X.
I'll bring my pager with me too.
Right. Well, God bless you. God is good, like you said, and I appreciate your time today. I appreciate your story. If you don't have any parting shots, then we'll cut it here. You got anything final you want to say to the interworld out there?
Thank you for being on my show, and thank you for everybody that, follows me on Twitter and has really been supportive. People think there's nobody behind that screen, and just because we wear, these very strong hats like lawyers, it doesn't mean we're not people with feelings. And so, I remember that, to be kind to one another out there on the interweb, regardless, because that's what Jesus would tell us to do. So you can speak truth and kindness and love, and just to remember that I am a person behind a screen who has feelings. So just something to say.
That's one of the best parting shots ever. I always offer people that, and it's like, I know they're writing both you and me hate as you said that. So no, they're not going to listen, but I like that you said that. It's like, who are some of these troglodytes out there in caves or whatever with cell phone reception that can write the worst things that they would not dare to say to me in person. They wouldn't probably have the callousness of heart to say to you. But yeah, it's boy, it's ugly out there. And so are several of the people. Anyway, God bless you, and we will see you around the way, Melissa. Thanks for appearing on Rules for Retrogrades today. Everyone out there, Deus